If ever there were to be a swan song, it had to be with Annabeth Rosen.
It had to be you.
It had to be you. We're not going to talk about any artwork. We're just going to sing.
We're just going to take questions, kind of carry on.
It has been such an amazing journey, first of all, to be at the CAM for nearly 17 years, knowing the full wealth of exhibitions that they have covered over, oh my gosh, almost 65, 70 years. I can't add right now, my brain is mush. But that history has allowed me personally as a curator to reach in all wonderful directions and tread in areas that I have no business treading in. And thank God for that, because I tread right directly into Annabeth's studio. And this initially started off as a site-specific debut of new work that would have happened in the Zilka Gallery. But as I began to research and know more about Annabeth's work, which I was first introduced to in 2010, through one of her students, many students that have come through your doors and have been touched by you, and she is really quite a goddess in this field, it became clear that another student. See, that's what I mean, another student.
What are you doing here?
That her work merited a larger look, a deeper look, a more expansive and continuous view. And that's what we've tried. Come on, introduce yourself. What's your name?
Daniel Trejo. Yeah, former student of Annabeth Rosen.
Oh, remarkable artist. I'm honored.
But as we mentioned, Annabeth has been teaching at UC Davis for the past 20 plus years.
20. This
20
is
years.
20th year.
Oh, well, it's perfect timing. And prior to that, you were at Temple, University of the Arts at Penn State.
It's in Philadelphia.
In Philadelphia. I get it all confused. And then prior to that?
School of the Art Institute, Chicago.
Chicago.
Bennington. I was at Bennington before I went to California from teaching at Bennington.
But a wonderful trajectory to go from Alfred, where she studied ceramics, and from Alfred to Cranbrook. And we're very happy that this exhibition will travel to Cranbrook next year. So it's a really beautiful arc. And we start in the middle. I think that was one of the, we do a staff walkthrough for our fact team and our staff members. And as we were walking through yesterday morning, we were talking about the work. The large space that you'll see, and we'll get to that part, really shows the arc of work from the mid-1990s, the late 1990s to 2013 are really all featured on that long, expansive base that our crew, Jeff is here somewhere, Jeff Shore, created, who has been remarkable. Our installation crew, I would say, is just above par, and there's none really, in my estimation, above them. They really do exceptional work, and it really shines in this. But that large expanse really arcs from late 1990s to 2013. And we were talking yesterday, and I said, well, let's talk about this early work. And she said, well, you're starting in the middle. Because, and what that's true, because the work really begins much earlier than that. But this is 20 plus years, and of course there will be years ahead of us, and there are years behind us that you don't see. But it's good to start with sample, because I think it provides an entree into the medieval tiles and some of the inspirational points of that have directed the work, nature, and how nature has been reflected in many different various forms, but particularly how this material intersects with the representations of nature. So I'm going to tap dance over that way and let you have the floor.
Well, don't you want to just ask me a question?
I did. I did. I thought so. Okay, you talk to me about the material and what has been the inspiration for the material. Come on over this way. Don't be shy. Love one another. This is sample, and this was done in 1990.
Started in 97.
97.
So it's complicated to begin.
Is it me? Is it you?
What?
We were humming. We're having a musical moment.
I'm not musical, but so always deeply interested in the history of ceramics. I think I mentioned this yesterday. I don't know when I said this. It's hard to do the same thing 2 days in a row. I'm going to do my best. Always interested in the history of ceramics, and I believe artists really must know their history. You are at a great disadvantage if you're not well informed about who and what came before you, up until what you're part of, what's happening now that's existing, that all the other artists are making right now while you're working. So I was making these pieces that were referencing nature, abstracted from the world, from the natural world, and architectural decoration, and they were very beautiful. Really rich, luscious glaze, a lot of copper, a lot of manganese, a lot of cobalt, sensational lead. I use that's really buttery and melts really low. It just kind of oozes over the surface of the ceramics. And I would fire them multiple times so the lead would kind of be burned in. In ceramics, there's like this funny matrix between where there's clay, there's glaze, and then there's this funny place like steam, like the steam in your kettle is the spot that's not actually the white that you see. The steam is at that 1/8 inch that comes off the spout. So in ceramics, there's like that. So when you fire multiple times, something happens where it becomes part of the material you see. So there's something very visceral, and you feel it, even though you see it. You also feel ceramics, the distance, that exists between the end of your hand. Peter Sheldau said something about this at one point, that ceramics exists in this realm. Also because of the domestic, the functional aspect of ceramics. Everyone, has this sense of ceramics. Everyone eats dishes. Everyone puts a cup to their lip. I know I'm diverting. So my students know to go like this. They say, wait a minute. So I'll go back to this. So I was making these very rich, luscious, these very thick tiles that were actually becoming blocks. They were like these big slabs. And I got very self-conscious that they were so beautiful. I thought that I was compromising on content by exploiting history and not enough invention and contemporary discussion of the medium. So I started covering them with other slabs. And then, of course, it was irresistible. I was compelled to put something on top of the slab that covered the thing. I couldn't resist. So I started making this piece, and it wasn't planned. I do very little premeditation. Art is actually a process. It's not a product. And so art is the thinking, art is the working, and I was grappling for a long time with this idea of this exhibition, because if you want to know about my work, you had to come to my studio. I mean, you have to come and sit there for 2 weeks, and we engage in conversation. We talk about what we're thinking about, what we're looking at, what's happening. Every artist will say that. And I was talking to Ed about this. He's here. And that, so for an artist, the gallery is like the threshold. It's where people, where culture, where public have access. But really, it's such an artificial, it's beautiful, but it's so artificial about the process. Anyway, back to the piece. So the piece is supposed to be like a sample of earth served up. It's supposed to be actually set into earth like level with the dirt and a small trough kind of around it, like someone dug it up and is showing you something for your inspection. And What else do you want to know about it? Yeah.
Are we doing that?
We can
Yes,
do that.
yes,
we can make it
we
a
are doing
conversation.
that. And I'm grateful to you.
Well, when you talk about the work in that way, has the work ever been situated in a kind of environmental space, in a public space?
What I actually asked Valerie to dig a hole here.
And I said no. And I said no.
I think someone else owns it now, so maybe, and he's, very bold. And someday I may convince him to dig a hole in his museum and put it down there. So
I think once it's a public installation, you can actually dig a hole in.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think the initial idea was to put it in dirt, to put it outside, and to put it almost like an earthwork, which is very interesting because so much of the work that we'll see on the large expanse does deal with the sort of cycle of life as it is represented in nature, and the seasons, and go ahead, take it away.
Well, I might have said this yesterday. I'm sorry if I repeat, but so when I came from the East Coast when I was 40, I moved to California, and my whole life, all my activities were indoors. I went to the beach, and my parents we went on holidays in the summer and stuff, but mostly I was a really indoor kid, and when I was making those earlier pieces and I was like making a flower or making a leaf, I really had no idea what nature really looked like. I was just like making it up. And I've said this before, someone may have written it down, but I spent more time outside my first year in California than I had the whole first 40 years of my life. It was so overwhelming and so seductive and so beautiful that's really when I got to inspect and look at and know. And that's when the work actually started becoming ever more abstract, because I no longer had to draw the picture or make the thing that referenced so directly. It became so much more internal. And it was, it was an extraordinary experience, overwhelming and wonderful. And I'm still not quite adjusted. I drive down 80 and I go, I can't believe I live here. I can't believe I live here. It's just an amazing life. So this work kind of started there at that place, early in California, And, it's also very odd in Northern California because the winters are lush and green, and the hillsides are emerald and wet and glistening, and the summer everything's burnt dry, grass, straw, and yellow, and kind of bone dry. And it's really difficult to get used to. You don't know about those things. So beautiful here, so lush and tropical in Houston. But
Go ahead, Vicki.
who else has a question?
You said this, you envisioned this with dirt, and I'm wondering how that affects the whole idea of the layering and what's happening with those textures if you have this thing in dirt.
Well, it's not actually in dirt. There's it's like level. It's like a recess. This is 20, Jeff? These are like 15 inches or 18 inches. So it's recessed about 18 inches. It's just lifted off the dirt by maybe a few blocks. And then there's like a trough around it. So you can actually see the sides like someone excavated. You know how they, in an archaeological, they dig and they, it's kind of like that.
So do you want to talk about the armature that you use? I mean, this is sort of a device between this and then the wave piece.
Yes, it's multiple. First of all, it's just, I have a very simplistic sense of engineering. And, I say that, if the steps on my house needed fixing, I married the opposite of me. My husband would tear down the house so he could build new steps to his liking, and I would take a Coke bottle and put it under the step. That was cockeyed, and we'd move on. And we've been married a very long time, so we've managed. But I think you do seek your opposite. I think that's common. First of all, I needed it lifted up. It was on chairs in my studio, you know, on studio stools for the longest time. Also, I'll talk about this again. It's a common thing that I think about is that ceramics is heavy and static, and every ceramics has like this flat bottom, you know, from the ground up, coil slab from the ground up. It just kind of irks me. So I like to just turn things upside down, you know, break them and have a jagged edge so air can get underneath. And, you know, so you feel with the wave too, like, so it's not static. I have this need to make it not be static. So, and with the large pieces, sometimes you don't know if they're being built up or being broken down. You don't know if they're like in decay. I like that kind of ambiguity if they're like with these pieces, found in nature or formed by hand. So like something is happening, something is moving, ideas are changing. And so I think about art that way, I think about my work that way. It's not static.
Yes, you had a question?
I want to ask you about the process. If I look at the drawings right there, they kind of connect to this right. And I wonder whether you do the drawing first or whether you do the ceramics and then do the drawings, or...
It's both. Like a lot of time, used to be, I was talking about, you know, how things change as you get older. And my drawings used to be 2 or 3 years ahead of the work I was making, because, you know, drawing is like this. And, you know, it takes a moment. And ceramics has mass and material and weight and time. The process is demanding. And you think it's immediate, but really, in fact, it's weeks, if not months, in making. And so, but as I grow older, the time gets closer, and I draw. And I actually draw from my pieces. Like, I'll come back and do a series of drawings from the work that's already done and try and fuel the next group. Every artist talks about drawing. Every artist draws. Drawing is how an artist thinks. And I know my students sometimes think it's punishment when I say, you have to bring drawings. They think, oh, awful homework. But really, it's the best thing you can do to draw every day and record your ideas. So that's how I do it. It's just kind of seamless. I rarely actually draw the thing I'm building. For these drawings, though, I did actually think of them in terms of their similar scale, because I needed to make an armature there's a really skinny metal expanded mesh steel armature under all the coil. And I needed to figure out the scale, because I only get one shot at making the armature and put all the stuff on, and then if it's not good, it's, so, you know.
Yeah, I always thought about your drawings as building muscle memory towards something. Is that apropos, or is that a little off, or?
Yeah, we talked about this too. Tell me again, muscle memory?
You know, this idea that when you're making a form, it's almost subconsciously your body begins to do that thing. So it's almost like the muscle knows where to go, just like when water, like,
yes,
you know,
yes.
it flows, it knows how to do it effortlessly.
Yes. Okay, so I'm a very argumentative. And even if I agree with you, sometimes I'll just, you know, it'll just prompt me to think the opposite thing.
The kick it till it breaks
The
routine. Inside joke.
So, 2 things. One is, yes, of course, that intuitive sensibility, that, you know, thing, you know, you're born with kind of, you know, an idea or a vision or an issue, and you work it through, you pick it apart for a long time. So yes, this muscle memory, this automatic thing. And if you look at, you know, I always, the drawings are reminiscent of each other. You could see my drawings from 1974 when I was undergraduate at Alfred. I have like little notebooks, and they have similar speed, similar quality, similar relationship of mark to the paper, you know, how big a brush or how small a brush I use on the size of the surface. So there is that muscle memory, there is that thing that is known and repeated, and yet As an artist, the thing you must do is constantly, that's your charge, is not to take it for granted that things are true, that this is what you know. Because you did this yesterday, it doesn't mean it's true today. And that's one of the reasons why I object to when people put me in shows or say, oh, I'm obsessive. Oh, I'm in obsessive and passion or obsessive and whatever thing show. It's ridiculous. It's not obsessive. It's not beyond me. It's my choice. I made it deliberately on purpose. So it's not like this, oh, well, this is how I do it kind of thing. You're constantly in check. You're constantly, not making assumptions. And really good artists, you see it throughout the course of their lifetime. Well, I don't know if they're good or not, but artists I really admire, their work is constantly changing on account of it. They'll take it's common to say you take a risk, but you're constantly like looking and looking and looking and re-questioning and reassessing and not taking too much for granted. So in as much as, yes, muscle memory, that sensibility, it's also, the argumentative nature, like not to succumb to that.
No, absolutely. And even through patterns, you get aspects of improvisation because it's the hand. It's automatically going to do a little something different. We're not machines.
Yes. And actually, that made me feel better today because because I was reading this thing that said, only mediocrity is great all the time.
I love that.
Embroider that on a pillow for Christmas for your mother.
What I love about this particular section is that we have an older work and then we have the most recent work, really within an eye shot. So Wave being like straight out of the studio as of a few weeks ago, hot off the press. And then these pieces, and it was something that interesting that you were saying about sample, about this beautiful thing that you covered, but then you had to do something on top. And then Bill brought up a really interesting point yesterday about the thing that lies in the inside of things. And so it's interesting that even within this, we're coming back to this idea of covering and uncovering, revealing and unveiling in a way, because these forms are the most recent of these mound series, and then these precede them. But there's so much underneath that we don't see that
well, you're not supposed to.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. I know. But then you give us this, which gives us a clue of what possibly, because none of these things are hollow. Someone had an interesting observation that you were telling us about. Someone said, why don't you make these things hollow? Because they're heavy.
What a ridiculous person. I mean, it's the whole, it's like the process, like it has to come from this, it's not a plan. This is like engineered. Like when the Earth was formed and this huge gaseous ball was spinning, and we have the eclipse on Monday to remind us. And so, it's not like you think of this from the outside in. It's like education. It's organic. Like you don't know how the class is going to be, but you start talking to one student and it prompts another student, and then this project prompts this project, and all of a sudden everyone is learning something in class. You don't come in and say, look, this is what you're going to learn today.
Well, some people do, but they're not very successful.
So that's what this is like. These, I don't want to reveal too much because, I don't want to spoil the fiction, but these are these. When it doesn't work, I drop it on the floor and see what kind of beautiful. I've always loved the shard. I've always loved the bit. I've said before that, when my work blows up, it's heartbreaking, it's terrible, you want to kill yourself, you work so hard and everything is just shattered in the kiln, but it's also so exciting, it's so wonderful, it's so beautiful, you made it and yet you didn't. But you did blow it up, but it's reminiscent of what you make, but not exactly your limitation of your control that you exercise. And sometimes just that tiny little shard, that tiny little piece of shit in the bottom of the kiln that's like garbage, really, but you know, that can keep you going for the next 3 weeks. And so these pieces come from, you know, that kind of process.
Well, what I love too is that with sample, and as we'll see with the works on the base, the way it begins. How did this happen? Still there.
Oh,
Jethro. There we go. What is this?
souvenir.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to
Talk about revealing. There should be some mystery here.
I actually like that.
Gosh, I lost my train. Okay, so we go from really accumulating. I know he's hiding from us because we keep talking about them. They're way back there. You go from accumulating on the surface of things. That was the thing that I was very curious about, the sort of evolution in the studio, where it is about heaping material on each other, but it's still very representational. And fixed, representational of nature, but it's fixed on a tile or a plate.
Yes.
And then whereas it becomes completely abstracted and the accumulation becomes these abstracted things that are then forced to be together.
Yes, that's such a good point, and I've thought about that a lot with these pieces. First of all, this is like, first of all, you know, you have to be able to move them. And so it's like the pieces on wheels. You know, a part of it is just, you know, common sense. In as much as, you know, there's a logic to any artist. So this is a kind of logic. That's my mother. She wants to know how it's going. She always calls in the middle of my thing, always. The other, actually, some of these I do. I'm not going to do it here, but these do. Some of these, you know, do lift off, and I do move them around. This is like having, like, you know, how you find a piece of paper and then do a drawing, so you have something to respond to. You know, sometimes white piece of paper, so you pick up little scraps, or, you know, you take all the book jackets off your books, and then you begin to draw.
I never do that, by the way.
Well, Valerie's a real scholar.
No.
And actually, we came to blows over those two different kinds of
Well, we didn't come to
sensibility.
blows.
Well, metaphorically.
Metaphorically. I would have taken a...
I don't think so.
It's always the scrappy ones, you know, you got to put your money on the scrappy ones. True. She's got, I have the neck of a 30-year-old because I pick up these heavy things all the time.
right.
It's true.
Where were we?
We came to blows because I'm such a scholar.
Yeah. Alpha, chrono. Who knew what an alpha and a chrono was? Now I'm going to have them tattooed, one on each forearm for Valerie. You know what that is, alpha and chrono? Who, you do. Who's the literature? Who are the book people? Who are the book learning folk in the audience?
Don't embarrass my community, okay?
Yeah.
Just tell us what it is.
It either goes alphabetical or
Chronological.
Nuts.
Well, you threw them a curveball, okay, because you were abbreviating things. We were thinking chemical things. But no, we decided that this would be thrown a bit together because the works are in such constant dialogue with one another. It really didn't make sense to make it chronological. But Alpha and Chrono was really the catalog. It had nothing to do with installation. But anyway, I digress. Go ahead.
Where was I?
I don't remember anymore.
Well, yeah, so that, you know, part of it is just, you know, a place to begin. And a lot of them come off that too. So, and that becomes that static. So some of the dialogue I have with myself, as I mentioned before, about these pieces, if you don't know if they're made or found. And I like that. You know, like the end of an earthquake, or, you know, you went to another, you know, you're not supposed to take things, you know, when you go to natural sites, you're not supposed to touch anything. But sometimes some people do. And when you abstract something that you find, something that you recognize, you know, something that may not actually even be art, you know, but you take it and you define it as art, like scholars rock, or everyone takes a stone or a leaf or a branch or a shell, And it becomes this valuable, this charged object that has meaning, aesthetic, cultural, historical, natural meaning in your life. It helps have you insight and experience. So a joyous, a different, an extraordinary experience. So these are like that for me, like you don't know if they're found or formed. And so I like that place. And this defines it. This is the human. Mother Nature did not make this. So this is the reference back to me, and that my deliberate, and I'm not sure, I just tell you my vulnerabilities too. Something I'm negotiating, something I haven't quite resolved.
The tile or the base?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know, you couldn't really pick it up. They're fired together, the wires fired onto it, it's like this one thing, it's not going anywhere, but I want you to have the sense that it is going to slip, it may just be like this. I
Well, and I love the precariousness, because you do work with that balancing. What is symmetrical, what isn't symmetrical. That's our alpha chrono moment. She likes things off, I like things symmetrical.
But that's my limit of my engineering.
Right, well,
quite frankly, that's the limit of that's the limit of my ability.
But if you turn around and you look, let's walk over to the freestanding pieces, because I think it is about how things are so precariously placed. It is this moment of just feeling at any moment these pieces could collapse, or they could tip over, or it's playing with scale, and it's playing with accumulation, and it's playing with balance. It is about this precarious moment, I think. Or am I over dramatizing it all?
I don't know. They're kind of like still lives or something. It's like nature more, I don't know. They roll out of convenience. Also, they're funny, like these big shapes up on these funny little wheels. They have a kind of comical, a kind of silliness, these big bulbous forms, falling out of everything. It's furniture scale, it's child scale, it's, there are a lot of references to other things in the world about them. They actually are furniture, these nice rolling tables.
But I love it's also about getting out of that framework of ceramics always having to be presented in a particular way. To me, it kind of feels like it's undermining this idea of how it's presented, whether it's delicate, whether it's, it becomes completely other, which I love too, because I like this idea that you are a sculptor who works with this material. It kind of feels a little very different than just framing ceramics, which feels in many ways somewhat limited when you have these conversations around it.
Well, I like that you see that you said that. I'm not sure I have much else to add. I really haven't been thinking about these at all since we've been here. I think because they demand so little, you just, and I passed by these really quickly, even though there are many of them. So this is part of a way that I work is when I was talking to Jenny Sorkin, who wrote the essay for the catalog, she quite didn't know where to begin, but one of the threads we pulled out is this idea of parts, of compiling parts. And you can see lots of these early pieces in here. Everything in my studio, anything up in my studio is kind of up for grabs. If I saw a better thing out of here, like all these were so many different pieces. Like see these? These are all the broken parts. I save it. And yeah, this is just kind of a way I work, where I find the things and kind of press them together and make sense of them. And in studio, we were talking yesterday about how sometimes even disparate things that have no business being together by sheer proximity, just physical closeness, have a sort of sense, make a kind of logic. And that happens a lot in the studio. It happens a lot in ceramics on a kind of the way that the medium demands you work. And I was saying yesterday how that in the real world, heavy things are on the bottom and big and little things are on the top. When you load a kiln, though, you load all the little things on the bottom and all the big things on top. So you see this kind of switched, you see all these big heavy things up in the air. It's like fantastic, wow. And so that all the parts of ceramics, for all the ceramics people in the audience, like I know you know what you relate to this, like all the process, the process is so demanding of the medium, and there's so many stages, and I've always really just tinkered, been really interested in undermining the process of ceramics. But within that process, within that rigor, within that history, are all these things, all this really rich, interesting information that you can use, that if you don't take for granted, that you can kind of use as prompts to keep making work. So much of the work is so much about the medium, too.
Yes.
So. Anyone else have a question? Yes.
I'm curious about the binding, all the binding. It has to do with the balance of this notion of it falling apart, but is it also metaphorical, or are you thinking about it?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. I mean, people come into my studio and say, when are you going to cut the wire off? It's so funny. Like, what are you, crazy lady?
I love it.
Well, the wires are like the drawing mark also. Like it becomes this black line of how I draw. So, and even though, I make these big, heavy sculptures, I really just think of myself as a drawer. I really just imagine these almost as drawings, three-dimensional drawings. And that's one of my tools, one of my drawing tools is this mark. And just the way in a drawing, your line on the square frame of the paper, is this formula to hold things together, or even the square frame of the paper is the formula, is the framework. So the wire, the limits of the wire, how much it can hold until you have to double and triple or snap, and it's also this idea that it's not finished. I could put another thing on here, and it could be better. But actually I couldn't, and it wouldn't be, but but that potential, that sense that it's ongoing, I like that, like the promise of continuation. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the system. Yes. Oh, this is going to be a hard question. I'm already letting myself off the hook.
So, it strikes me all the time that I think a lot of people think about failure as a pejorative term. And I think within a lot of this work, it feels really generative. And I wonder if you can kind of talk about how you think about failure.
Is that real? Oh yeah. Well, I could, I'll pow right in the kisser.
But I mean failures of things like within ceramics, we might think about the things like glazes cracking or a piece falling apart in the kiln as, the pieces.
Oh, I thought you were talking about human frailty. I'm so relieved. Well, I'm not going to talk about the human frailty part. There's almost no such thing. Like everything is a possibility. I studied with a Japanese many of you know Jun Kaneko, right? He had shows here, and everybody knows his work. And I was saying yesterday that one of the things I learned from him is that everything has potential if you recognize it. If you see it and you know it and you understand it, then it's useful, like stripes, or like hair on your head. You know, you have like all this soft skin, then you have this big gaping wet hole in your head, your mouth. So if you need something like that, like a big contrast, then you can use it. So for me, failure is missing. Failure is a lack of awareness. And so I work very hard in studio to be aware of the things around me. To pay attention. I know anything I need is within my grasp, if I have the wherewithal to recognize it. So it's really, nothing is quite so, you know. Is that bad now? Probably.
Turn it back. No, I'm kidding.
You know, it was. This is one of the other arguments I have with June. And I've been on both sides of this, and this has been going on for 20 or 30 years. And that is something just finished once and it's done? Or is it endlessly possibly changed? And I was kind of joking before when I said, okay, now it's bad, but you know, maybe it's just right that one way. And if you do one more stroke, one more breath, one more mark, like, you know, the movie Mozart, Mozart, and the king says, oh, there's too many notes. And Mozart says, well, which ones do you want me to take out? So, you know, maybe it is right just once. So the concept of failure is very malleable. It really depends on the moment, your sense of doubt, how profound that is, and when, of course, it's profound all the time, but, you know, it's such a good question.
And we should say Dean was a former student as well.
Yeah, we know each other a very long time, like family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I want to say something else before, I know it's almost time, and I want to say something like, and it makes me think of it when you asked me that, and how I responded, which really wasn't an answer to your question, but that, and I mentioned it last night when we were sitting together at dinner. I'd had a bit of gin. But I do think this is true, and I've thought about this, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around it exactly yet. But like, this is all like a facade. Like, this is all kind of nothing. Like, of course, it's everything. It's everything. It tells you what I know and what I don't know. This is all very important, and deliberate decisions, and an act that took 40 years or 50 years to come to. But in really, the work is really just the idea. It's just the armature that I hang my idea on. It could almost be anything. I'm not quite sure I understand that myself, but it could be anything. It just happens to be this. You know, it's just an armature. And sometimes I think in my studio, and there's a picture in the book, you can all buy the book, right, Valerie?
In October, it'll come out.
That's my pitch, my PR pitch, as if this isn't a PR pitch, but whatever. It's love.
It's love.
Now, what was I saying?
I don't remember. You were talking about ideas can be transferred.
So in the book you'll see this picture, the studio. And it's a picture of all these things in the studio. And the studio often looks like a tornado came through, but it's actually pretty organized. But like, a lot of times I think that the work is just like, and don't take this verbatim, don't quote this if you're here from the press or Instagram, but it's like a metaphor. It's just like what's left over after I've blown through. Like, it's the remnant. And in a lot of ways, that's true. It's just the remnants of my thoughts. It doesn't matter in a way that it's a green, shiny thing. It could almost be anything. Does that make sense?
Yes. So we've got 10 minutes left. So should we just do a cursory look here and then?
Wait, we have a question.
Yes, he has a question. I'm so sorry, sweetie.
As I walk through here behind you, I've been really kind of jealous about you being able to put your hands on the works.
Go ahead.
I have been so attracted to do that.
No.
And I feel like Bill and staff would have words with me if I did that.
Oh, yeah, we
And
would.
would it be possible to make a play box of extra pieces that people could touch?
Sign up for a course.
Well, if you give me
Sign
a,
up for a course, that's
give me
it.
a pliers.
Knowing Annabeth, she'll send us a box of remnants, and that way you can touch them.
You know what? They're not necessarily safe to touch.
Yeah, they've got lead in them.
No, they're sharp. They have
Oh,
sharp
that's
edges.
true. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
So let that be a lesson. If we see blood on the platform, we know you've been touching things.
who else wants to know something?
Edible, this section. right
Yes, a lot of people have said that about my work, especially earlier work like pies or cakes or a kind of lusciousness. But that's ceramics, and it mimics cooking, baking. I mean, it's the same thing. And it's actually the same chemicals, just different heat range. And you could actually fire your cherry pie and get a glaze.
Oh, the
if you
sugar.
needed to know that. Well, the trace elements will make glaze.
Can you talk about, there's a big emotional range. There are some that look sort of sad, like they've like fallen over, or they're like that, or other ones are like jubilant, like jumping up.
Yes.
When you start a piece, do you know what the emotional effect is going to be, or is that, does that come out in the process?
Well, it really depends on which side of the bed I woke up in the morning. You know, when I work, I said, you know, I don't have like a picture of what I'm going to make in my head and then go through the motions. I really kind of work and respond to the material as I go. Having said that, I actually, I hope this doesn't sound too sticky goopy, but you know, I really have like some vague sensibility, and it is greatly informed by an emotional facet. And so I actually try to tap that, because one of the things is like when you're old and you've been working in a medium, and I've been doing ceramics since I'm 15. It's a long time. I know so much about it. And I just don't want to rely on that technical. I want to, you know about culture. I want to know people. I want to know about art. I want to know about, you know, and I want to know about me and my relationship. So. And it makes me, yeah, I'll stop there. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I also respond to work like that too.
Could I just, sorry, my question is a little bit related. It's more towards the colors, because it's a very organic work. You work a little bit with the organic forms, textures, patterns, and you choose colors, most of them related with earth. For me, at least, when I see your work, all the colors you choose, it's earth colors. I would like to ask how intentional there's choices, and if for example, you ever thought about to put a different type of color on it, or no, definitely this is your 100% earth, and how intentional is that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, good, great, good, true, absolutely true. I did once, a long time ago, I used this barium copper glaze, like a blue turquoise glaze, you know, like not shiny, but looked like it had been buried under the sea for a long time. And I remember, like, I fired like a huge kiln full of this stuff, like 40 or 50 pieces. It was so beautiful when it was this big on the test tile. When I opened the kiln and had like 1,200 pounds of turquoise glaze, I wanted to kill myself. So, yeah, I really respond, like blue is very hard. Because blue is the sky and blue is hard. Well, green is hard too, because nature, it's like impossible to be an artist. And green, like to appropriate and to use and to make convincing what's out there, and like so much better, you know. But this is also just the color of my clay. This is just the natural palette of the material that I respond to. And, you know, I've deeply seduced by, you know, everything about, you know, the medium clay. And so I kind of work within that range.
It's beautiful. I just
Thank you.
to know how intentional it was.
But you had a really interesting response to the use of the slip over the glaze, particularly in the aftermath. I mean, I also want people to understand that you're not hermetically sealed when you're in the studio, that there's a lot of the world that comes into the studio. And you were talking about 9/11 and how you really couldn't conceive of all this color in the wake of that.
That's true. So I was talking early on how I was making these like incredibly ornate birds and you know, highly saturated color glaze and 9/11. And so I took white slip. It's white clay. It's liquid clay that usually goes under. So when you look at this, you see red clay. And then I put a thin wash of white slip, so it's like gessoing a canvas. And then you put the clear over, so you see, you know, this is the clay coming through, and this is the white slip. So I just took the white slip and just poured it over the highly saturated colored things, because you just, you know, there was no joy. You know, you couldn't respond. And everything in studio became really ashen and looked like, you know, pale and washed out and kind of funerary. And it was much more suitable, talk about the emotional range of work. So that's when that happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned before, this has a large arc all here, with some of the early works being here, and then even 2012, 2013 toward the very end. But it's all mixed together because there's a wonderful confluence of forms that move from one thing to another. But I don't know if there were specific questions. I think we're about...
I have one quick question.
Yes,
because
Catherine.
I think when you look at the work, you talked about having it in earth. These also have this feeling of accretion, like coral reef. Have you ever thought about installing this like in a low pool of water? And
Yes, of course, water. Yes, I used to make containers and put filled with water and put ceramics in. You just get a fish tank and fill it with water and put your stuff. It's very nice.
It has that feeling.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And people are thinking, of course, about the coral reefs now and everything that's going on in the world. So
Yes.
I think there's a sort of in a way, you've pulled into that archetype and have commented on it.
Well, I'm not a fan of the literal in art, like when an artist comes in and says, this means this. Like, I love a lot of people's art, and then you look at it and they go, oh, well, this is the mountain behind my house, and this is the strata.
It's an illusion, in a way.
Yeah, you don't want to break the fiction.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about like global warming.
Yes.
But, and you know, with ceramics, when you know, this is dirt. 70% of the Earth's surface is clay. So, and I wasn't kidding when I said, you know, the Earth, you know, the gases are spinning and the molten metal, the heavy ones, are in the middle or in the core. And, you know, this is the stuff, if you work in this medium, actually, if you do anything, that's what you do every day. You work with, we are that. So, you know, but I'm not going to go there.
Well, it's interesting to have 20 plus years of work all kind of in one place. And I asked you this the other day, which was a bit unfair, because you're like, I'm still processing. What does it mean to see all this work together? And
it's horrifying.
It's horrifying, she says. But there's something to glean from it, I think, when you see it all together. And it's not all of it together, because, you know, as Annabeth alluded to, she's very prolific, and the studio is incredibly organized, but incredibly packed. And but I do wonder where goes the next, where happens. You were alluding to the base and the fact that this is your frailty at this moment of taking that tile base off of those pieces like crater and bowl, and you know, where do you see the next arc? Where's your hand taking you?
You just have to come to studio and sit with me the next couple of weeks and see. Even if I could articulate it, and there are ways I can, I wouldn't presume. I have to say, it's not my, I'll work and see what I learn. But certainly this is, you know, I just want to say this is because I know we're at the end. This has been an incredible experience for me. I tried to talk Valerie out of this on many occasions. And you can't imagine how deeply grateful I am to her that I was not successful. I have met and re-met some of the most extraordinary people and have worked with a crew that is unparalleled in my experience. And it's something for that alone, it's an experience I wouldn't have forfeited for anything ever. But I had to go through it to know it, and I'm grateful to you. And the whole entire bloody institution, that was so incredible to me. They're remarkable people here.